I'll call to order this meeting of the Urbana City Council for Monday, September 11th, 2023. Will the clerk please call the roll?
Ms. Wu, Mr. Evans,
Here.
Ms. Hersey,
Here.
Ms. Colasetti,
Here.
Ms. Bishop,
Here.
Ms. Wilkin,
Here.
Mr. Quisenberry,
Here.
Mayor Marlin.
Here. Next item is approval of the minutes of the May 22nd, 2023 meeting. Is there a motion to approve?
I move to approve the May 2nd, 2023 meeting minutes for the meeting.
Is there a second?
Second.
Moved by Sharice, seconded by Jaya. Any substantial corrections? All right, all those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, same sign. That motion passes. Additions to the agenda? I don't believe there are any.
Mayor, do we need to remove the presentation?
Yes, we'll remove that presentation. Public input. So we're removing the presentation from the Sister Cities group. That was done at a town board meeting earlier this evening. Public input, there's no one present for public input, so we will move on to council input and communications. Any comments from council members? Okay, we'll move on to reports of standing committee. There are none. We'll take the committee of the whole report from James Quisenberry.
Thank you, Mayor. For the consent agenda, we have one item, resolution number 2023-09-079R, a resolution authorizing acceptance of an Illinois Arts Council Agency, IACA, grant for public arts program operating support.
Is there a second?
Second.
Moved by James, seconded by Jaya. Will the clerk please call the roll?
Mr. Evans,
Yes.
Ms. Hersey,
Yes.
Ms. Colasetti,
Yes.
Ms. Bishop,
Yes.
Ms. Wilkin,
Yes.
Mr. Quisenberry.
Yes.
That motion passes.
And then we had two items for the regular agenda recommended for approval. The first being ordinance number 2023-09-032, an ordinance revising the annual budget ordinance, budget amendment number 1, omnibus.
Is there a second?
Second.
Moved by James, seconded by Sharice. Further discussion? Grace?
Thank you. I have a few questions since I wasn't here last week, which I appreciate the recommendation from fellow council members to put on the regular agenda to allow for a little more questions and discussion for those of us who weren't here. I have a starting general question that has to do with the 1.5 million of the DCEO money. It seems to be that there's an impression that we've already decided and agreed upon using that money for fire stations. I'm wondering if the administration and staff, if that is your operating understanding, and if so, what that's based on.
We did 2x2s with council members, and I think there was a general consensus that that was an appropriate use of the 1.5 for the DCEO grant. However, I would say that this is actually just being transferred into the CR&I fund, so you'll have another chance when the funding comes forward for the fire stations in general to decide if you want to keep that there or if you want to bond more and assign it to another facilities project.
And I
So-
will add that Braden Belcher, did you get the email from Braden? Okay, he answered your question earlier today.
Yes. So now here's my thoughts on those answers. So saying that we had 2x2s and there was council consensus, my main issue with that is that's not my understanding of how we decide things in a democracy, and that we need a public discussion and a vote from council and not pulled aside in 2x2 meetings off the record. Also with that, I don't believe that I attended one of those. I believe I had COVID at that point and didn't get contacted about a makeup, so I don't believe I was involved in that one. And even if I were, again, I don't think that's the way we decide things. I think this was a big issue with the crisis follow-up co-responder team, saying that we had 2x2s as updates and then saying that that counts as approval. I don't think that's the way things are supposed to work. In the email that we got, I really appreciate the information reminding me that we discussed this on September 19th, Committee of the Whole, and then approved it the following council meeting. That was the last time that we publicly discussed this issue, and it was very clear in that discussion that we had not decided on the use of these funds. I think more time, if anyone else wants to rewatch the discussion, is great. Mary Alice asked specifically, what's the process from here? And we were told that council will still get to have input on what these funds are used for. We talked about doing it for equals grants potentially. Fire stations was brought up as one possible option by staff, but that was not the conclusion of that discussion the last time that we publicly discussed and voted on this issue. It was absolutely not decided and left that council will still continue to decide what to do with these funds. So I appreciate hearing that, you say we'll have another chance to decide that, but I'm worried that we're already in this trajectory where it seems like the impression is that we've already decided to use these monies for fire stations, and that then if it comes up, maybe we could do less. And I'm just concerned about that. I think that we still need to have the public discussion, and council needs to vote and have discussions on how we're going to spend this money. And I'm worried that it's just getting slipped in automatically for fire stations, and once it goes into the CR&I fund, it's not going to be kept track of, and we're not going to have further approval of what that money's spent for.
Chris?
Thank you. Yeah, the idea that council approved the use of this money for fire stations in 2x2 meetings, all I remember of that 2x2 meeting was being handed a piece of paper by Sheila Dodd telling me what the budgeted money was for, and the community development at the time made the decision that the money would be used for fire stations. I was being told what was going to happen. I didn't agree to it. So, my concern is that we approved community development capital improvement projects. That's what the resolution said, not 1.5 to fire stations. That wasn't what it was said. What was said? It was community development capital improvement projects. And looking at the Department of Commerce and Economic Opportunity's intention with these kind of funds, I just disagree that the spirit and the intent of that money to do infrastructure for low-income and moderate-income neighborhoods is to build government buildings. I just don't see that. That's why I'm very opposed to that money being used for fire stations. So as we go forward, however we go forward, that will be my position. Thank you.
Therese?
Okay. I kind of understand what both of you are saying. However, capital improvement projects means that we basically still have to maintain, we don't just maintain what's outside of the city. And when I say that, what I mean is what's outside of the building where we actually sit. We have to also maintain our infrastructure, because it doesn't make any sense to have fire stations that are falling apart. Who do you think is going to come and work for our fire department? And FYI, both of the fire stations that have been planned to be rebuilt are in neighborhoods where I guess you would say that's the lower, like, since we like to have to label everybody, of the marginalized population of Urbana. One is on North Lincoln, which is in my ward, which is basically everybody thinks, because it's a black neighborhood anyway, that's the lower part of the Urbana. The other fire station is on Philo Road. And that also has been determined to be a particular socioeconomic strata of Urbana. We are building, it's not just a government building, it's a building where services come out of that building. Fire services come out of that building. People call the fire services for several different reasons. My mom fell down the steps. I can't wake my uncle up. Somebody's throwing up in the bathroom. Fire services are called. And, fires. And it's not just a government building. And by the way, government buildings aren't meant to fall apart around the people that work with the government. It's not like we're building palaces, we're building services. And we're trying to keep those services up to date. You know, that's why I guess I don't understand what the problem is. Because our fire services are important throughout this city. I really do not understand.
Carol, and then Chris.
So let me just add a little bit of information here. So when we got the DCEO grant and the initial allocation between the $1.5 million and the $500,000, then as a result of the 2x2s and the consensus that we got, Tim reminded me, we put it in the capital improvement plan for facility improvements. That was, we got consensus, and then we put the recommendation in, and it was approved by council for facility improvements. Again, more generic than the fire stations. This budget amendment is to transfer the money from grant funds into CR&I, which is a generic pool of money. It still hasn't been specifically assigned to the fire stations. We do, when we show you a funding plan, we do talk about it as part of the funding for the fire stations, yet to be approved by council, because we've been given direction to get as many grants as possible to offset the borrowing that we're going to have to do. And that doesn't mean that you've made the allocation, but given that we have gotten these grant funds and they are appropriate to this use, we're saying, well, here's grant money that could be used, and then here's the amount yet to be bonded. The whole funding plan for the fire stations has not been determined yet. So I just want to make that clear. That's, I don't know if you find that helpful, but you'll have at least one more opportunity to say how you want the fire stations paid for and with which money.
It's either grant money or we borrow. Grace, or no, Chris, you had a comment.
So the problem is that the money from the Department of Commerce and Economic Opportunity is meant to benefit the people of the low and moderate income neighborhoods. That's what the money is intended for. And the money that can be used for the fire stations is endless money for debt. I mean, the plan is to go into debt and borrow money to build those fire stations. So why are you taking money intended for low and moderate income neighborhoods? That's the problem I have with it. I would rather spend $1.5 million on a grocery store in Ward 3. That's what I'd like to do, okay?
We don't have anything to do with that. We do not lobby grocery store developers. That's my point, as you and I.
Well, go ahead.
That's your comment. Grace, you had a comment?
Yes, thank you. So I agree that this is a complicated issue, and I do want to have that discussion about how to spend these funds and if it's appropriate to use them on a fire station or not. That was my overall point, is that we have not yet publicly had this discussion, and council approved on it by a majority vote. So I think that is a really important discussion to have, not tonight, but I think in the future, before we decide what to spend this $1.5 million on, I think that that is the conversation and the approval process that needs to be done at a later date. So I would like to motion an amendment to add the language, which I'm open for recommendations for changes of a section in the therefore clauses that the 1.5 million from DCEO will be earmarked for capital improvement projects requiring specific approval from council before any funds are allocated or spent.
Seconded.
One more discussion?
Well, no, we're talking about an amendment right now. and-
Okay, so we
And I'm
need-
going to speak to the amendment. I think that's not the way to approach this. I think the way to approach this, which is what I would have said if I had been recognized before additional talking was going on, is that the question here is, this is a budget amendment that has multiple dimensions. So because these, I think there's two bullets in here that are related to this, because these two items are causing a challenge for believing that we didn't have enough discussion on it, is it better to try to divide this question, which I'm not really excited about trying to do because it's an ordinance and it's a spreadsheet and so forth, or is it better to send the whole budget amendment back to Committee of the Whole for that additional discussion? If it were possible to divide the question for this budget amendment and split this conversation off, I would recommend that's the amendment that should be going on at this point, or the question that should be going on at this point, as opposed to trying to create legislation on the fly to represent, one particular approach or one particular desire that that is coming up. If the city, if the operations can tolerate it going back to Committee of the Whole as a whole, we could just move that it goes back to Committee of the Whole for next week for more discussion, like we could have had last week if we were all here. Or if it's possible, I don't know from the clerk, if it's possible to divide the question and split those two items related to the DCO grant off so that we could pass the rest of the budget amendment that has no entanglement with this conversation, or maybe different entanglements depending on, further discussion. So I'm going to vote against the amendment that I just heard, because I think there's a better way to approach this from a standpoint and still address the concerns that there needs to be a deeper discussion on that particular item.
Carol?
Just for, if this is helpful, I think it would be good to separate off the item in total, and that this conversation continue and reach a conclusion, because the DCEO money has a deadline on spending it, which was always a challenge. And I believe the deadline is the end of June of 2024, sorry. Yeah, we already passed that. So there's a time sensitivity to it. And so that's got to, I think that's a legitimate factor for you all to weigh in as you decide how you want to allocate the money. So for what it's worth, I think it would be helpful to just take everything related to that out, and we can, if you want to just remove it, we can bring another standalone item for it and just make that cleaner.
Does anyone want to speak to the amendment on the floor that's been proposed? Grace?
I appreciate the discussion, and those were also things that I was considering and willing to amend my motion, or we can vote and shoot it down and remove. But I am willing to change my motion, and I
Wanna
think if he
withdraw your
seconds it, does
motion?
it work? Well, hold on. I'm saying I would, for dividing the question and saying return just this DCO money amendment back to Cal and pass the rest of the budget amendment.
James?
Yeah, I think it would just be easier to strike these from it and have a new budget amendment come through
Okay.
dedicated to it.
I'm willing to.
Because the way the ordinance is written, it's much easier to strike these two items from it than it is to rework the ordinance into two ordinances that we would then send one back.
So I am willing to withdraw my motion for amendment.
Seconder agree?
Yes, I agree.
All right, we're back to the original motion. Therese?
Okay, so in my opinion, since everybody's talking about discussion and how we need to do all that, then maybe what we need to do as well, since this, the amendment has been rescinded, and also regarding this particular ordinance, then if we're sending, James, you're saying we send this back?
I
I just
could
want to
tell
get
you what I'm
understanding.
saying when I get a chance to get
Okay, because
recognized,
what
I'll make
I
a
was going to
motion.
say is that maybe we need to add this subject, this particular subject, and particularly regarding fire stations, as on the agenda as a discussion, for us to actually have open discussion about everything, and so we can get a better idea of what, we can say it in public, we can say it, and everybody, that no one has to worry about OMA and all this other stuff when it's being discussed, because apparently this needs to be discussed amongst us all. And there are two people that are not, well, Chandra is here, but she's not here, her voice is here. Mary Alice isn't here at all. And I think that maybe everyone needs to be present on some level, even if Chandra's voice is here, her lovely voice. But we need to have a serious discussion about it.
Okay, James, did you want to, and then
Yeah,
I want to recognize.
I would move that we amend the current item under consideration to strike from the, it's basically the spreadsheet that lists the details, Exhibit A, strike the items related to the DCO grant, which I don't have any other way to describe it as to, there's one item for moving it from, with the capital replacement fund as a revenue and one moving it as an expenditure. We would just strike those from the budget amendment Exhibit A.
Second?
We have an amendment to strike the two items related to the DCEO grant from Exhibit A.
If I could speak to that just briefly, the intent being that we remove it from the rest of this budget amendment, which has different things in it, with the expectation that staff would bring the second budget amendment of the year to us, focused specifically on that as early as next week with the Committee of the Whole.
Okay. Chandra, I want to give you an opportunity. Did you have any comment?
My question is, why couldn't the 1.5 be left within the Community Development Grants Fund until expenditure was decided, whether it's going to be on fire stations and how much of the 1.5 will be on fire stations, instead of putting all of it into the CRI?
James?
I was going to say, I assume the effect of my amendment that we're talking about right now would mean that it stays there in the meantime. So it will stay there, Chandra, until a different action is taken.
Well, I'm saying just without any budget amendment. Like, why does it even need to move at all? Because it seems like this is going to be a longer conversation than even just next week,
Well, it may prove.
if it comes next week.
Yeah, I'm sorry, Chandra. This is Carol, I'm just trying to respond. It may well be a longer conversation than the next couple of weeks, but if the council can come to a determination, then the money is available to spend, and we agree that it's for fire stations. Otherwise, because otherwise we need to decide, I think, sooner as opposed to later, now that we're talking it through, to make sure that the money is spent on time.
Okay, thanks.
All right, we have an amendment and a second, and the amendment was to strike, the motion was to strike from the Exhibit A the items related to the DCEO grant. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? Okay, we'll move on to the main motion, which was to approve ordinance revising the annual budget ordinance for budget amendment number 1. We have a motion and a second. Was there further discussion on the rest of that? Okay, will the clerk please call the roll?
Mr. Evans?
Yes.
Ms. Hersey?
Yes.
Ms. Colacetti?
Yes.
Ms. Bishop?
Yes. Yes.
Ms. Wilkin?
Yes.
Mr. Quisenberry?
Yes.
Mayor Marlin?
Yes. That motion passes.
Okay, the other item on the regular agenda is resolution number 2023-09-080R, a resolution expressing official intent regarding certain capital expenditures to be reimbursed from or paid with proceeds of an obligation to be issued by the city of Urbana, Illinois.
Is there a second?
Second.
Moved by James, seconded by Sharice. Further discussion? Grace?
Thanks. Just a quick clarifying question, that this is for allowing reimbursement so they can be tax exempt for up to 10 million, and that any bonds we do take out would come for another discussion and approval and things from there, correct? Okay, thank you.
Yes.
Will the clerk please call the roll?
Mr. Evans?
No.
Hersey?
Yes.
Ms. Colacetti?
Yes.
Ms. Bishop?
Yes.
Ms. Wilkin?
Yes.
Mr. Quisenberry?
Yes.
That motion passes. Next, thank you, James. Next item is reports of special committees. There are none. Reports of officers.
Yes, I'm glad Tim's here tonight, not just to help me with that DCEO item, but I asked him to come back and take a moment during this reporting time to give you an update on Savannah Green, because there's a really good story of creativity and collaboration, and just, I'm really proud of the folks at Public Works, and I know Tim is too, on how this is working out. So he put some slides together and is going to talk you through what the latest is. Thanks, Tim.
Well, clearly I have a failure here already, but that's okay. We can talk through it. The picture here was just kind of an overview of the Savannah Green area. We talked about this extensively during the CIP and the reduction of work there and trying to still come up with something that works. What this picture would show you is just an overall patching map of the area, and then as well as a green area that you don't see, but it was three of the legs of the alleys that we decided to go ahead and do a pilot rehabilitation plan on, in addition to the patching that we programmed into the CIP. We got bids back recently for the patching that came in at about $150 per square yard. For the Class B patches and the PCC jointed pavement, those are different colors because the map showed them differently. But those are what you would envision as very much spot repairs. We would go cut out a panel of concrete, remove it, fully replace the full depth of that. They were just, and if you saw it on the map, you would see that they were just kind of sprinkled throughout. A lot of them were actually along the southernmost east-west alley there that had kind of consistent failures throughout it. And then others were through other parts of it. The green portions, I believe they were, I think it's Michigan. There were 3 legs of alley just north of Michigan that we decided to do this rehab. They were probably 3 of the worst alleys that the options were trying to fully replace these things, which was kind of part of the original bid that we went out to and got $270 per square yard for doing a marginal fix. That we rejected those bids. What we've done now is we've done some some different things there, which I'll go into on the next slide. But we did meet with the HOA at the beginning of August to kind of discuss this pilot plan in addition to the patching that we agreed to do within the CIP. The HOA was very supportive of the means and methods that we kind of proposed to use here, and the additionally that we committed to kind of reviewing this to see how this is working, and if it's going to work, we would then extrapolate it throughout there in future years. All of the full depth patching will be completed within the original CIP budget by the end of October. They were marking those out this week, and we'll begin work on that here in September and probably complete sometime in early to mid-October. The pilot plan was a combination of our public works operations staff as well as our annual surface treatment contract, getting our contractor that's doing our surface treatments engaged on that. And this all had to happen really quickly. We came up with the idea kind of mid to late July, and the contractor was coming mid to late August. So that's why we engaged our public works staff to get them on with some of this advanced preparation stuff so that we could meet that timeline. Like I stated, the original concept around this that we rejected prior to the CIP was $265 a square yard. So a lot of this is major value if we can get it to last. And the intent would be, upon completion of these other spot repairs with these pilot programs, is we want to get all the alleys into what we'd consider maybe a fair condition or something comparable to what the rest of our network is, because they are used very similar to roads. And really just try to get something that is going to minimize this degradation that we can actually maintain regularly and affordably. So this slide, better pictures here, and I will blow this picture up because I didn't do that on the last one. This just kind of walk you through it. We had pictures back in 2021 when we first started, when I was here originally talking about Savannah Green. We had some pictures of the existing degradation, and what you can see is, you see a lot of failed panels throughout this top 2021 picture. The 2023 picture is in a very near location to what that is. And what you can see there is just we had put down a bunch of just kind of temporary patching through there over the last 2 years, just trying to get something that would hold. What we'd come up with is doing kind of an advanced prep, and you can see the Urbana Public Works prep team out there. We used essentially a low-grade asphalt mix to try to basically create a workable surface for us over the top of some of that failed concrete, followed by then a contractor seal coat here, which I'm not sure why that's not picking up, but I'll zoom in there a little bit for you. This is like a chip seal. You would see oil and rock, and we did multiple layers of that over the top of this. And then the final product over here, this is what that alley looks like today. Very nice. We've heard a lot of positive comments back from the residents and the HOA where we're at today. Now, ultimately, we're going to have to see how this holds up through the conditions. But at $30 a square yard, if this holds up on the worst alleys for 3 to 5 years, we can build that into our annual seal coat program and touch it for a fraction. It won't be $30 per square yard every year. It'll probably be closer to less than $5 per square yard on about a 5-year cycle is what we're targeting with our other surface treatment program. So we're going to be monitoring this. We did a couple little differences between each 3 alleys to kind of see what we thought was going to hold up best. And the premise is if this ends up holding up and lasting for 3 to 5 years without major failures and something that we can kind of react to, more sparingly, we would extrapolate this through the rest of the alleys within the subdivision because they're all in much better shape than these 3. So I just wanted to update you on that. It took a lot of collaboration from Public Works, the contractor, and the HOA to kind of come up with this. And this is, above and beyond what we had proposed in the CIP initially, and we were able to work it in with our Public Works operating budget and our existing surface treatment budgets. So, any questions?
Therese?
How old is the Savannah Green development?
About 20 years.
Oh, okay.
Chris?
Quick question, Tim. Looking at the finished product photo, is that loose gravel or is it kind of held?
So essentially what happens with the seal coat is you don't hot mix asphalt or cold mix asphalt is mixed. It's mixed oil and rock and aggregates, and then they lay it down and pave it and it hardens up. This is basically like you're mixing it on site. You go and you do a shot of oil down the road, you do a shot of rock down the road, shot of oil down the road, shot of rock down the road, and you sweep up the loose fines. So what it's like today is it's going to be seemingly very close to like a grittier than normal asphalt surface. But the initial is, a rock or an oil, then a rock layer, oil, rock layer, and there's some loose aggregate that we continue to sweep up through there to make sure we pick up all those loose fines. So, probably after a month or two, people are not going to know the difference between an asphalt road and this. It's going to be a little bit more gritty than that. You'll have better traction probably than some. But yeah, it's not necessarily cohesively mixed. It's kind of mixed on the ground.
Okay, is it going to endure snow plows and, that kind of rough
Yeah,
treatment?
We do this on lots of our roads.
Okay,
I think over 10 or 15% of our roads get this type of treatment. And the difference between this and like doing like a rehabilitation project is if you do it in a timely manner, it's truly preventative maintenance. It's like a wellness check with your doctor. You go and everything's good. We don't have to do anything major. What we've converted to since I've been here is to a 5-year cycle on these things. Typically with seal coat, surface treatment type things, they last anywhere from 3 to 7 years depending on use, wear and tear of the roads, things like that. We're trying to commit to a 5-year cycle so that some things may need a little sooner and we don't quite get to them, but some things, could go a little bit longer. But if we can commit to something in the middle, we think that we're going to be able to keep all of that preserved for a much longer period. And it becomes a cyclical process where we just hit anything that's seal coated, we hit it every 5 years.
Grace?
Thank you. Thanks so much for the update from staff. Really appreciate having an update on this and seeing the pictures. And really appreciate the flexibility and coordination with the HOA on this and trying to do what we can, utilizing efficiently our public works staff and the contractor. And just wanted to point out / ask, confirm, you're saying, so the public work prep, you said digging down because that was part of the problem, right? Was that the soil was not compact for these alleys enough when they were built? Isn't that right? So that's why like these 20-year-old alleys are in kind of worse condition because the soil underneath was part of the problem. Is that right?
So it's the base is what it is. It's not necessarily soil. It's soil that's been stabilized. But the issue primarily with that is moisture. So the attempt here is to keep that moisture out of there. If we can keep the moisture out of there, you have less freeze thaw impacts, like you can see in this 2021 picture, plenty of cracks and opportunity for water to seep into that base to keep it more hydraulic, I'll say, that when the freeze thaw cycles hit, that pavement comes up and down more. We're going to see how it holds up. We don't know. That's why we're calling it a pilot plan, because typically, we wouldn't do a lot of this stuff on concrete roads, but the other part of that is that's with the premise that concrete roads aren't in this shape. That's the premise that we're sealing all of our joints in concrete roads and patching things in a timely fashion, which it's supposed to happen, and we just have not had budget for that for decades, and we don't keep up on that. So that's, I talked with a couple different pavement management, consultants out there about what they thought, we could do, and the idea was, start with this, and potentially there's some more advanced surface treatments that a cape seal is something that's used where you do a chip seal, and then you do a microsurface, which is more of a fine grit asphaltic material layer that even seals better than a seal coat itself. So you do a seal coat with that on top of it. So that may be an option at some point, but a microsurfacing, we need quantity to do that. We're not even going to get the microsurfacing contractors to come unless we have quantity that's happening in our area. So
What we're doing here is trying to address the literal underlying problem of the alleys, of the kind of layer beneath it and then building on top. Right?
not this pilot plan. This pilot plan is trying to keep water from getting into that to prevent further degradation.
Okay, so that public works prep work, you're not digging down and prepping that bottom layer.
Correct.
Oh, okay.
That is essentially, this is essentially what I would call like a leveling layer. So we're trying to level out and grade over the stuff that you see in 2021, 2022, 23. We came through here with a mill and essentially planed some of that stuff out to get a workable surface. And then we put a tack coat down, which is, you can see like a black asphaltic material there on the edges. Mm-hmm. That's a tack coat that then when we put this low-grade asphalt mix on it, that tacks to that, and then we roll it in place, and then we seal coat over that. It's essentially putting like liquid Band-Aid over something, a high-class liquid Band-Aid, I'll say. The idea is trying to keep water out of that base so we reduce the impacts of the freeze-thaw cycles from creating further degradation. And we'll see, but we're doing this for $30 a square yard versus $150 per square yard, where we wouldn't be able to touch any of these alleys.
So this is just the patching, this is not the full replacement plans, because some of that is also planned, right?
Yes, so patching, full depth patching is still happening. That contract is happening. It's essentially, they went out and marked things out today, and they'll start construction within the next couple of weeks, and it'll last less than a month. That's full depth spot patching for places that were essentially, you know, like, not to say like these, you would recommend full depth patching for these things, but we couldn't afford it. We couldn't have done all 3 of these alleys plus all the other spot patches. So we decided to do all the spot patches in all the alleys that were in fair to good condition other than the spot patches. And then we're trying a pilot plan on these to see if this works, because if this holds up on these alleys, we're gonna be able to do this over all of the rest of the alleys. If not, all of these alleys are gonna be very costly over a very long period of time.
Right, and then is the full patching, full depth patching in those spots, the full replacement to the underlying
Correct.
bottom of it? Okay.
Correct. We're digging it all out and putting all new in, tying the new concrete to adjacent concrete.
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
James?
Yes. Yeah, everybody. Yeah, and some of that's, so a lot of the surface. Yeah, so a lot of the surface treatments, it's not a sophisticated thing. It's aggregate and oil. You know, you can have different combinations of that stuff. A lot of it becomes kind of what products are available, because people aren't producing aggregate products for these purposes typically. You know, in 15 years ago, everybody used, you know, crushed limestone, white rock, angular, and it turned to dust real quick. And county roads, it was fine because nobody cared about the dust out there. In urban settings, everybody hated it very much and went away from it. Then they went to pea gravel, and it was readily available. And they used to do boiler slag, which is a much finer grit that you would see, like usually on like county highways, you would see it kind of like sparkles a little bit. But it was a byproduct. You know, steel companies weren't producing that slag material for our use on roads. It was just what was left over when they were done with their product. And that's what this product is. This is still steel slag. We're just kind of subject to what is available. Urbana switched to using steel slag as aggregate, I'm going to guess 7 or 8 years ago, because boiler slag was not available and people like that. This was kind of the next thing that was available, is a little bit larger, more like the old stone that they were using. And what we've had to date has been very successful. It holds up. A lot of the stuff has more fines in it so that it rides smoother than some of the old angular and pea gravel type aggregate. But yeah, this is, if you've seen a lot of what the county's done recently, they're using the same product. And the A1 versus A2, it's just multiple lifts. So most people are just doing an A1, which is a single shot of oil, a single shot of rock aggregate. And A2 is just doing 2 of those. They have other alternatives where you can do a fog coat, where you do a fog of oil over top of it to help bind some of those loose aggregates in that you're not sweeping as much, but just kind of depends on what you're using and the application rates.
Thank you.
J.O.?
I just want to say thank you to the whole team for the creativity. I think you know that I was a little resistant because I felt like we went from promising a lot to not quite enough, and I think this is a really creative attempt, right? And I think that for our residents to see that even when there are challenges with, you know, what we might want to be able to do, that the city staff is willing to work so hard to come up with a solution, I think that really speaks to everybody on staff. So I just wanted to say thank you.
Yeah, thanks. I'm pretty proud of everybody that was involved in this.
Chris?
I want a motion that the Public Works Department is eligible for ice cream.
There soon will be an ice cream store on Main Street. Well, I would also add the tremendous cooperation and enthusiasm from the Savannah Green residents, the HOA. They really worked very closely with city staff, pointing out the worst spots, and it was a great collaborative effort, so thank you to everybody.
Yeah. That was interesting with the HOA meeting. By the time we were done, they were pointing out what we were patching and what we weren't. So,
Well, they drive it every day. so.
Yeah.
Thank you, Tim.
Yep.
Any other reports of officers? No? There is no new business before this body, so with that, this meeting is adjourned.